Not again, not again, not again.
Hello and welcome to the Exploding Appendix Podcast. My name is James Marcus Tucker. In this episode, I am joined by Exploding Appendix's Bradley Tuck, and we will be discussing individualism, freedom, and artistic exploration.
Oh, no, it wasn't. But it was a really well-written manifesto that actually had costings compared to the Tory manifesto. And when it came out by accident, remember? People thought that it had been leaked before it was ready, and everyone thought, oh, this is going to be another nail in Jeremy Corbyn's coffin. But actually, everybody looked at the manifesto, and then, in a couple of days, even The Spectator was writing, there are some good ideas in this manifesto that the Tory party could learn from.
Christianity is often seen as being altruistic because, you've got to do all these kind of things for other people, and generosity is always valued, all these other things. But there's also a self-interested motive, which is your reward in the afterlife. So you do all these generous things, but you can do it for self-interested reasons because you've got this idea of the reward in heaven. And so God sort of appears as gives you a kind of self-interested motive to do altruistic things. Right. It seems under capitalism something similar happens. So under capitalism you kind of have, instead of heaven being the reward, money's the reward. Mm-hmm. So money gives you reasons to sort of negate your own self-interest, as it were. So you negate your self-interest in order to make profits, or you negate your self-interest in order to survive. So you constantly have to negate your self-interest. So in a way, capitalism is almost an altruistic society in the same way that the sort of Christian society was, in the sense that Christianity kind of promoted selflessness, but for a reward which is heaven, a symbolic reward in a way, and the symbolic reward becomes money in capitalism.
But a long time ago, Huey Newton, I think, said, you don't fight capitalism by creating black capitalists. And Du Bois said that even a longer time before. And that's actually the same thing is true about race, about sexuality. This is about race. You don't create a more just society by having it so that 50% instead of 4% or 7% or whatever it is of your CEOs are women instead of men. You don't create a more just society by making sure that a whole bunch of gay people can also be CEOs. You don't create a more just society by making sure that trans people can be CEOs. You create a more just society by eliminating CEOs.
It reminds me of the time in history that electricity was starting to be discovered and manifested and given to the people. It was a time in which they had no idea what would come next. They had no idea what these technologies would do. And before those technologies came about, they were just as science fiction as indefinite life is now.
But of course, once I started doing research and you think about what the space rockets are actually there for, they're not really to take people to space. They're to deliver nuclear bombs and drop them on the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe and blow millions of people up. And, again, the demonstration of fusion power. And actually, what is a nuclear reactor? It's an atomic bomb factory which happens to produce electricity. This is why the British government is still enthusiastic about building nuclear power stations, even though they're totally uneconomic, because they have a fantasy they need a next generation of nukes. And then, of course, computers, which are basically guidance systems. That's really one of their primary functions of this period. Again, we think about the transistor, the chip, they're guidance systems for missiles, which happen to have a nice spin-off that we can now have Skype conversations with them.
And now, for a brief intermission. Hello, this is Bradley Tuck, and you are currently listening to the soundtrack to The Good Egg, a Warner Bros. Looney Tunes episode from 1939, composed by Carl Stalling. What turned me on to the music of Carl Stalling, apart from the obvious exposure as a child, was references made to him by the musician John Zorn. So here is John Zorn talking in a documentary called A Bookshelf on Top of the Sky.
cartoon music for me was a real breakthrough in terms of musical form, how it was structured. It seemed to me that it was completely revolutionary for the time. Maybe it was in my subconscious, you know, from watching Roadrunner as a kid and what have you. Maybe it was all the different kinds of music that's used, the quotations. I always loved Ives as a young composer. Ives was one of my favorites, and cartoon music seemed to relate to Ives in some way in terms of quotation and different genres, everything being treated the same slapstick kind of way. But, you know, a little bit of jazz would appear, classical would appear, all these different kinds of things would appear in really in a new way. And it was really, I don't know, revelatory in a lot of ways, and very inspiring. And I used to tape shit off the TV, and I'd have all my little cassettes of Roadrunner was the best because there was no dialogue. I used to listen to it and just try to imagine it without the picture. And it was difficult because we're trained from children to tie those sounds together. You hear you hear someone going up the stairs. It's hard to but I tried to listen to it as abstract music and learn something about musical form, maybe new ways of creating music, ways of breaking established ideas of musical development. Nothing is really developed in that music. What's developed is what you see on the screen. So there's a drama going on. The drama is played out. But to the director, the sound is secondary. To me, the sound was primary. So I tried to find some kind of, analyze some kind of new structures, and I think I learned a little bit about new ways of putting sounds together by the analysis of what happens in Carl Stalling specifically.
One of the things about John Zorn's music that really excited me was his ability to take influence from multiple genres and never to remain fixed by them, always to create something new. Listen to his Naked City's Torture Garden album. It feels, as with Carl Stalling, as if he is zipping between and playing with genres, hardcore, jazz, classical, and so on. It is this ability to play with genre, to synthesize, and to attempt to move beyond them that got me interested in not only John Zorn, but Mike Patton, A Stratosphere, Secret Chiefs 3, and Mr. Bungle. It might seem strange to see Stalling as a forerunner to this. We tend to overlook the experimental dimensions of film and cartoon music. But if it is also true that most people's experience of, say, atonal music doesn't come from Schoenberg, Webern and Berg, but from Bernard Herrmann or John Williams. Setting music to a moving image tends to legitimate an experimentalism that might not be accepted elsewhere. What makes Stalling's music exciting is that through an embrace of this slapstick childishness, he is able to draw outside the lines, experiment, innovate, and break down artistic boundaries. Well, I think she's right to the extent that transgression for its own sake isn't inherently good.
Yeah, and by the way, I should preface that by saying I do like Angela Nagle's writing quite a lot. So
Yeah,
I'm not criticizing her as a writer. I'm just saying.
No, I think I agree with you that my agreement with her is that I think she's quite right in the fact that transgression for its own sake shouldn't be fetishized.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not inherently progressive or it's not inherently good.
Mm-hmm.
Nonetheless, there is something I would like to rescue from the transgressive tradition, and that's why I enjoyed the second talk today that we went to.
Well, what is it about the transgressive tradition that you find kind of rescue worthy? Like, what is it about?
I think some of the reasons why the countercultural left adopted it was one because it's fed up with the kind of Stalinistic left and wanted to somehow have that freedom.
You mean in the 60s?
Yeah, in the 60s. It wanted freedom, so it wanted freedom to break sort of rules and thought that was something that was worth defending. And it didn't want to do that in a way that was fleeing from certain symbols or saying you couldn't say certain symbols because then that would create a new authoritarianism. So it encouraged kind of ways of subverting those symbols challenging them by taking them and doing something else with them.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than censor things, it tried to subvert them, and
Mm-hmm.
that seemed to be much more important within traditional counterculture.
And here was a huge march, and what was the central issue of that march? The central issue was gays in the military. So instead of fighting for universal access to healthcare, something that would change everyone's life, it was about fighting for the right of gay people to go abroad and kill people in unjust wars. And I think that was in 1993, and the so-called LGBT movement has never recovered from that.
I think it's not an accident. You think about the 20th century's revolutionary heroes. Like the Lenins and Trotsky, where they all played chess, or Mao played Go. So they themselves obviously saw these leaders of the bureaucratic revolutions of the last century. They played games. So it seems to me if the workers are going to do as well as them, we've got to play games, and we've got all this much more sophisticated choice of games to play as well. Yeah,
that's true.
And so we need to skill ourselves up in that.
Well, there's plenty to set her apart from her sister, Christabel, and her mother, Emmeline, who really supported women's equality, or the struggle for women's the right to vote rather than equality. They really saw it as the preserve of upper-class women. But I think what's interesting about Silvia, rather than us thinking about, did she? Because I've had this conversation with people about C.L.R. James, who they kind of see as a Renaissance man. He dips into cricket, into music, into fighting colonialism, into dialectics, all sorts, and they see him as this sort of great intellectual and writer. And people similarly see Silvia as someone who went beyond just the one particular cause. But actually, I think both of them, what's interesting is they're both very consistent in that they are Marxist. Silvia doesn't say, I'm a Marxist. C.L.R. James says that's what he is and how he wanted to be remembered. But in fact, Silvia's approach, as you've said, really, to women's suffrage is to see it as part of a broader struggle. It's not, let's go from this issue to that issue, but that there is a broader struggle. So you would necessarily be interested and involved and campaigning around a great gamut of issues that you see are a product of a similar system.
Thank you for listening. If you like this content and would like to read, watch, and listen to more, please head to our website, www.explodingappendix.com, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Exploding Appendix, ideas and culture with guts.